And last Rosh Hashanah, we were socially distancing, wearing masks, holding services outside, figuring out how to celebrate the high holidays in an unprecedented time. In the past year, we've encountered many challenges and triumphs, and our Jewish community has continued to evolve. We've now entered the month of Elul, the last month of the Jewish calendar, in the period of introspection and preparation leading up to the high holidays. Rabbi Nava Levine explains that Elul is understood as the month in which we take a personal inventory and consider our past actions. We're meant to carve out time for personal reflection, to think about where we have come from and where we are going, where we have succeeded and where we have fallen short. We don't simply jump into a new year, we prepare for it. Each weekday morning during Elul, it is traditional to blow the shofar. The sound awakens us from our routine. It startles and reminds us that we must act now. Jewish tradition says that personal change is possible. Transformation can happen in the very moment we hear the shofar. It can happen at any moment that we decide to make it so. Though transformation might happen in a moment, the resolve to make a change takes time. Resolve requires time to reflect and draw courage, and time to evaluate honestly the direction of our lives. In order to move in the right direction, we must pause to consider which direction to take. Like so many other areas in life, the more effort and determination we put into the project of preparing to be our best selves, the better our results are likely to be. As we embark on this process, like in our own lives, it's also important to pause, reflect, and grow as a community. In a moment, 3 leaders in the Memphis Jewish community will help to usher in Elul and begin this reflection process in a conversation with Leigh Mansberg. Leigh is the president of Junior Achievement of Memphis in the Mid-South. Her fundamental belief is that every experience and every opportunity is a chance for a child to grow and learn. Before joining Junior Achievement, she served at Epicenter, Bridge Capital, Shelby County Schools, and St. Mary's Episcopal School. Leigh is on the boards of Facing History and Ourselves and Temple Israel. I'm also thrilled to introduce our panelists who represent 3 of the Jewish community-wide organizations in Memphis. Jeremy Weiser is the Chief Operating Officer of the MJCC and has worked in the JCC field since 2002. He was a JCCA scholarship recipient and has served on panels at various JCCA conferences. Jeremy is a Memphis native and was a student at both the Margolin Hebrew Academy and Bornblum Jewish Community School. Dan Weiss is the head of school at Bornblum Jewish Community School. Dan is a day school alum and has participated in the Day School Leadership Training Institute at the Jewish Theological Seminary and the Harvard Principals Institute. Bluma Zuckerbrot-Finkelstein is Executive Vice President of the Memphis Jewish Federation and Chief Impact Officer for Jewish Community Partners. In this capacity, she manages Memphis Jewish Federation's Community Needs Assessment and Planning Initiatives, Jewish Engagement Programming, Community Relations, and Israel and Overseas Grants, Programs, and Initiatives. She also holds a master's in Middle Eastern Studies. And before I turn it over to Leigh, again, I want to thank you all for joining. And if you have questions, please, you are welcome to chat with me directly in the chat box, and we will answer the Q&As towards the end. So again, thank you all. And Leigh, thank you for being our facilitator today.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and it's so good to be here. And I'll ask our other panelists to unmute themselves so we can have as much of a normal conversation as possible in this crazy Zoom world. But really honored to be here. Love this Memphis Jewish community and so proud to serve as a leader within it and to get to be on this panel with amazing leaders who've all impacted my life in so many different ways. And I kind of want to begin this conversation. So many of us work in the youth serving area. And so as we begin this conversation, I love what Lauren said, that we spend the month of Elul really preparing for the High Holy Days, reflecting and getting ready, and that it's an exercise, which I think probably comes a little bit easier to adults than to our children. So I'm going to spend a lot of this conversation framing this in my work. It's all about creating pipelines, about creating pathways to the future for children. And a lot of this conversation, I'd really love us to frame with a pathway to children for a meaningful High Holy Day experience, a pathway of reflection, and then hope for our children that all of our organizations provide so beautifully. So with that, I want to kind of start with a quote. Theodore Herzl said, "If you will it, it is no dream." So I thought we would kind of look back, and I wanted to ask each of you, I think that what our community has had to will into life right now has been rooted in so much innovation. So Jeremy, I'm going to start with you. If you will it, it is no dream. You're at the JCC. We've all had a year in so many different ways. If you willed it, it is no dream. When you reflect back on this year at the J and where you are now, what is your big takeaway about where you've been?
So first of all, thank you, Leigh, for doing this, and Lauren for putting this together. Bluma and Dan, I wish we could do this in person, but at least we're doing it this way. This past year and I've gotten we all do, but having a child, 2 children of my own also that have had to go through the same things that everybody else has. Reflecting back on it as a JCC staff member and the idea coming out of that initial quarantine, we as a JCC at least viewed it as, I guess, using the quote, we're going to will summer camp into reality. We knew that we needed to be there for these kids. They had been locked up in their homes. They had been staring at screens for so long, trying to make virtual schools work, and the schools did an amazing job jumping in. But for us, we felt like the summer, we needed to find a way to make something as normal as can be. And we knew that we could do something in person with them. And looking back at what the staff were able to do in a very uncomfortable setting, created as much normalcy in that moment for those kids as I think they were going to be able to have. There were certain parts of the summer that were missing, and it was no secret. But we did everything, and we had staff who, our marketing team was doing science projects with the kids at staff, with the kids in camp. So we had people that just got on board and said, we're going to make this happen. We're going to do what we need to do because the kids need it. And that was really our first thing coming out of that initial quarantine.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And so, Bluma, since y'all are housed right there, when you reflect back on that summer, you were there, and then you think about your own work, where would you put yourself within that as you reflect on innovation and willing things into place?
Yeah, well, picking up on Jeremy's point about camp, that first summer, not this past one, the one before, we got together and said, we have to do something for the kids in our community, right? We usually give grants for Israel experiences, and all those programs were canceled. And all the camp scholarships that we give, all those overnight camps were canceled. And we really felt that the kids needed something. So we sat and brainstormed and came up with our Camp at Home Strong program, which I think was incredibly creative and innovative, where we had the kids, both middle school and high school teens, create their own Jewish engagement experiences at home. And it was really empowering. And I think that's one of the main themes of this whole experience, is creating empowering children, teens, families to create their own Jewish experiences at home. And the incentive was that we gave stipends to the kids. They had to submit to us a plan. They could choose whatever they wanted, whatever they thought fit in with Jewish engagement. And it was a very broad spectrum of the programs and projects that we had. But we had 50 kids in our community engaging in at-home Jewish experiences. And some of those projects were just incredibly exciting and creative. So I think that was really one of the silver linings of this whole experience, was to, again, empower them to create their own meaningful Jewish experiences.
I really thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really interesting thing about, and I want us to return to that, this kind of conversation about self-agency and empowerment of our Jewish children. But Dan, you know, they've now had this summer and you're getting ready, you're getting your teachers ready, and you've got to launch a school year. Tell me about, as you reflect upon your successes for the year, as you kind of took our children for the next 9 months up until May, and you're launching Monday, and you reflect back, and you've heard what they've had to say. Where are you in this? Where are you most proud? What did you dream into innovation, into being?
You know, it's funny that you start with that quote from Herzl, because, you know, if you will, it is not a dream. It's so easy to have thought about this past year and what a nightmarish situation it could have been. And when I look back on all of the things that we accomplished as a school this past year, we were able to do things that we had only dreamed about being able to do. We needed to create an atmosphere for our students that would enable us to be on campus every single day. And I think that one of the things that I have heard time and again, and in a lot of the educational articles that I've been reading over the summer, the articles are all talking about, all right, how do we fix this learning gap and the lost learning that happened this past school year? And I keep scratching my head and thinking to myself, what learning loss? Because we didn't have that. We had this ability to provide for the kids in a way that had everyday real learning going on campus in our school, and we pushed the kids farther and farther and farther ahead. We also, obviously, because of the pandemic, we needed to think outside the box, or as some of our staff have learned this week, we need to think of that phrase a little bit differently. Instead of thinking outside the box, we need to think about the fact that we are already outside the box, and instead we need to start thinking inside the box. We need to think about what are those tools that are sitting there in that box for us, and how can we use those tools in a different way that's going to be best for the kids, as opposed to having to search outside the box for a tool here and a tool. They're all right in front of you. You just have to go inside that box and think about how you're going to be able to use it. So whether it was using our outdoor spaces to do the things that we wanted to do, or utilizing technology and, you know, finding funding from the state or through COVID relief funds and things like that to provide all of these things and give the kids the experiences that we needed them to be able to have, and think inside the box.
I love that, inside the box. And we all picked up, I mean, those of you on this call who know me will find it hilarious that I completed my own PPP application for junior achievement on so many levels. That was not where I was going in skill sets. So we all, in reflection, just developed these interesting skill sets that took us outside of the box. And I know I found a lot of things we're going to hold on tight to. So when you reflect back on things you never thought you'd invent this year, that you're not going to let go of, that, you know, we find some good in it. What are you not going to let go of? And I'm going to go in reverse order. So Dan, kick us off here. As you reflect back, what's going to be added on to the experience at Bornblum that just makes it better and stronger and more equipped for the future?
So I think that there's two main things that really stick out in my mind. The first one is the use of our outdoor space. We're lucky to have an incredible campus, and I think that the outdoor space on our campus previously had really been underutilized. We'd go out there for PE and for recess, And that was about it. Now we have a blooming garden, we have a greenhouse, we have a weather station, we have a bat house, we have a butterfly garden, we have a composting station, we have 4 outdoor classrooms. We have all of these different things that enable us to take the learning outside and experience things in a different way that I think have really enriched our school. That was one of those dream things, right? One of those, every decision that we made at the school, we needed to make that decision by thinking, what do we want to endure post-pandemic? Right? I didn't want to spend money and make decisions on things that were only going to be, a year and a half ago, we thought, oh, we're going to do this for 6 months and then life will get back to normal. And then we're like, oh yeah, at the end of the school year, things will get back to normal and we'll start this year in a normal way. And here we are now starting school wearing masks on Monday. And so we've tried to make decisions that weren't just time bound by the pandemic, but things that we would be able to utilize afterwards. The other thing that I'll just mention of programmatic things that I think can and should continue well into the future is we re-envisioned our Grandparents' Day. And I have kids in the school also. My youngest child is in 7th grade at our school, and he has never had a grandparent day in all of his years of going to school that all of his grandparents were able to attend until this past year. All of his grandparents were in attendance with him because we were able to do it virtually. They didn't need to come in from Cleveland or Columbus or from anywhere else. They were able to be on the screen with him. And I think that for me, that's one of those opportunities that we have now that we never would have thought of before, that I think is something that should go on in the future. And that doesn't mean that we don't want grandparents in our building. Please send your grandparents to us. We love them. We want them to come visit. But this gives us the opportunity to do a program that to a bigger scale in a way that really meets our students' needs.
I think that's just a really lovely idea. So if anything, we've learned that we can globally connect differently so that the isolation of being in a city, that we actually bring our grandparents, we bring, from door to door, we're bringing the generations back no matter where they are. So we've created a way to be more inclusive, even and not bound by geography. I love that. Bluma, what would you say it will continue forward?
Well, during this whole period, we became so much more flexible and adaptable, learning how to pivot quickly. It was much easier to do the digital programs the second year, but that first year, COVID hit right after, for example, our Yom HaShoah program, which is really, that brings in 500 people. It's really our largest program. And we had it all planned with a speaker coming and, the usual and in the JCC social hall. And all of a sudden we had to quickly pivot that to Yom HaShoah, to digital. And remember, that was right when COVID hit. So, we didn't know what to do, but we pulled it off. And interestingly, we ended up having over 1,000 engagements between all the different interactions on Facebook and people asking and looking at the recording afterwards, and those who signed on and shares. And so it was really a wonderful experience and helped us move forward with all of our digital programming after that, to be able to pivot that quickly and to not be bogged down in how we had originally envisioned it. So I hope that we're always able to pivot in that way and to be flexible and adaptable. And we also saw in general that we were able to engage more people in our programming on Zoom than in person. And we can talk about whether that's positive or negative, but I hope that we're able to create some kind of hybrid model moving forward, where those who want and crave the in-person programming can have that, but those who want to be at home in their pajamas can also be able to engage. So I hope we can continue with that. And finally, we just saw so much incredible kindness across the community. I mean, whether it was donors stepping up, our foundation fund holders stepped up in an incredible way. I mean, we would get from our agencies, our schools, and our synagogues requests for urgent COVID needs, and we would put out there, and our donor advice fund holders would just jump and say, I'll fund that, I'll fund that. And it was just remarkable. And the kindness that people showed to each other, whether it was the college students who helped train seniors on iPads. Now, it's hard enough to train a senior when you're sitting next to them, but imagine, how do you train a senior on an iPad through the telephone? I mean, I can't even imagine how these college students did it, but they did. And they had to go to their house and drop it off and then go back home and call them. I mean, and the kindness that people showed to each other during this time, I really hope that when the pandemic is over, that we can just build upon that and continue it.
I think that I love that. So far, before we even get to Jeremy, we've come across, and Jeremy got a lot to live up to on this one, because if anything, Lauren and all the powers that be on this call, I feel like an ad needs to be taken out in the Hebrew Watchman of a contract we're making between each other that we're empowering. We are organic in our program, and we are able to let go of things. And more than anything, as a community, we practice incredible kindness toward one another. I mean, if we take anything away from this call, let's all commit to that, because I mean, these are just lovely reflections to carry with us. Jeremy, what would you add to that?
It is something to live up to, because they've taken, really the gamut of what we should all be taking away. I'll say for us as a JCC, there are so many different services that we offer, starting from our infants all the way through our seniors. And for me, the blessing in disguise in all of this is what we learned about our staff that are supposed to be there for the community, the creativity that they came up with, the talents that we learned about people that I've let my staff know. Don't think that we're going to forget that you have that talent that we all of a sudden learned about. When we need to pull on it, we will. Because even when things get back to what we all define as normal, we're not going to stop doing some of the things that we've done, whether it's the digital stuff or pulling different staff in to do something special with a program because we know they can do it. It presented opportunities to us. We had to learn it the hard way, but it presented opportunities for us that going forward for all of the agencies, the things that we now know we can accomplish, I hope we're all going to continue to take advantage of that. I mean, things that we were able to do with people who were in Israel, but because of the digital age and what we learned we can do, we had some top-notch speakers that we otherwise couldn't have done in that same time frame, because the cost of having them in person would have been prohibitive. And now it wasn't. There were ways to figure things out.
I love that point. Like, we just figured out new ways. We just became unafraid of it. Like, there's a title of a book out there in the business world, Sacred Cows Make the Best Hamburgers. And this idea that we get stuck that programming had to be one way, and really doesn't. And people really are much more adaptable than we give them credit for. I want to pivot a little bit, and we'll go to Exodus now. I'm going to take us to a quote to Exodus, and we're going to get a little more serious. Been very hopeful in our reflections, but our children also live in a world that's more complicated than it's ever been. So in Exodus, we read, "For I, the Eternal, will visit the inequities of the parents upon the third and fourth generations." So our children are witnessing a lot of behaviors in the world. We see an incredible rise in anti-Semitism, and we are just seeing a world that is far more complicated. And some of our behaviors in adults are not modeled what we want our children to see, and they're hyper saturated with it. It's saturating them in the social media. It's saturating them. How do you, in your reflections, and we'll move to hope next, and as we kind of conclude our conversation and lead to that, how are you in your work trying to create a world where adults can navigate and see this, but are also becoming empowered to help children navigate a world that's a little more complex? It's a lot more complicated as a Jew to navigate. Just the increase of security at all of our places of worship. There's just so many more signs that the world has changed. And so who would like to go first? Who wants this one first?
I'll start.
Bloom, are you going to go first on this one?
I am. Well, it's a very
Great.
timely question because one of our priorities that we just set for moving forward is to strengthen our community relations agenda. And a major part of that is combating anti-Semitism. And part of that is also civil discourse. And we've actually created a new community relations task force, which is going to look at setting up policies and protocols for how to go about combating anti-Semitism. And we hope to have a lot of different subcommittees who will be working on this issue. And it's all part of community building, both within our community in terms of working on civil discourse and also reaching out more to the broader community and really forging stronger relationships and developing allies. Because one thing that I think is missing in Memphis is that there are a lot of groups out there working on this, but there's no coordinated effort. When there's a hate crime, whether it's anti-Semitism or against another ethnic group, there's no established protocol for how we as the entire community respond to it. And we don't all, people speak out individually with those that they have personal relationships with, which is great. But organizationally and communally, we need to all be stepping up for each other, developing better relationships. When there is something racist that happens, we need to be out there. When there's an act of anti-Semitism, we should have our allies stepping up for us. So it's really a major agenda item of ours to really think through the community relations issue and the combating anti-Semitism. And I really think in the wake of COVID, we have, I see a contradictory trend that over the last year. On the one hand, we've become closer, and all that I spoke about in terms of the kindness that we all extended to each other. But I think, to your point, we've also become, because we haven't had that in-person contact, at the same time, we've also become more alienated from each other. So it's like both of those things are happening at the same time, that we're extending incredible kindness to each other, but also we're becoming alienated and we're becoming a lot more siloed. Because who did we see during COVID, right? Only our family, maybe our close friends, but we didn't have the usual interactions that we have with people who are outside of our immediate circles. And I think that's really created some kind of alienation and a siloization, if that's a word. And I think that's contributing to your point about social media, because instead of sitting around the Shabbat table, right, or going out with friends to a restaurant and having disagreements in a civil, respectable way, right, we're all just communicating on WhatsApp groups and Facebook and Twitter, right, getting our points across. And I think we need to really work on restoring those basic ties. And, I've had people semi-joking say to me, I don't know how to socialize anymore. I don't know how to engage in chit-chat anymore, right? The basic schmoozing that you do, right, at the Kroger meat department, or when you're picking up your challah at Ricky's, right? I mean, those are real meaningful interactions that people have outside of their immediate circles. So how do we, I think to your point, Leigh, part of restoring that civil discourse and role modeling for our children is that we need to restore those kinds of everyday interactions so that our children can see us interacting in a more civil way, in a human way with each other.
Can I just piggyback on that for a second? Because I think you're making an excellent point. And I actually had this conversation this afternoon with Michal Amalim, who's our Jewish Studies principal. She was listening to a podcast the other day, and one of the things that was being discussed was how this is really, there's my text message, how this really kind of gets in the way for kids especially, because we're in the middle of this pandemic, and as a parent, we're always trying to find ways for our kids to get off of their screen, right? They're constantly looking at their screen. Get off your screen, read a book, play a game, go outside and play. Get off, and now here we are in the middle of a pandemic. Make sure you get on the screen for your class that's coming up next. Make sure that you're connecting with this person over there. Or your grandparents can't come visit you. Make sure that you're FaceTiming them or Skyping them or what, does anybody use Skype? Whatever it is nowadays to communicate with them. And, because for the last decade really, because kids are so tied to looking at their devices all of the time, whether it's with their headphones in their ears or for whatever reason, they're not paying attention to the world around them, right? They're closing themselves off to a lot of those things, and it's really gotten in the way of empathy. And, to your point, Bluma, kids don't know because they can't empathize with others. And it's a skill that we need to go back to teaching our kids. And for us, that's actually one of the main focuses this year at our school. We're moving to this idea of design thinking, and the first element of design thinking is having empathy, right? And so that empathetic way of doing things, it ties in with our social emotional learning. It ties in with raising mensches, which is what we all want to be able to do. It's thinking about the other person and not just thinking about yourself. And that's really, I think, that the key here to your point, Leigh, that unless we can teach the kids to empathize with the other, then either we're only focusing on ourselves and the problems that are upon us, or we're not even paying attention to ourselves because we're so busy living in our own world that we don't know that the problems even really exist.
Thank you for sharing that. And Bluma, I'm really glad Dan went second there, because I kind of wanted to get to, you talked about this need for almost what I would call micro opportunities to, the creative collisions that take place at Ricky's, that take place. I figured out a problem with Dan in the checkout line at Kroger a few weeks ago, and he was quite helpful. And so how places like the school, like Bornblum, how places like the J can start as these powerful places of micro opportunities for these engagements. So Jeremy, when you listen to Bluma and you listen to Dan talk about, and by the way, I'm a huge fan of design thinking, and I think social emotional learning is our number one focus for all children this year, because they are going to need the tools to navigate the future. And so Jeremy, you sit on this huge gathering spot, right? You sit at this place that is often at the forefront of the community coming together and facing, I was just so deeply moved when we've had the temple shootings, the experiences when we worship together at the J, and the community coming together as when we face these tough times. So as you've listened to them, where are you on that as we kind of face the reflections on our challenges?
They each, I'm going to piggyback on two things. They each said something that stuck with me, and Dan's was the idea of, as we're thinking about things, that we need to be thinking of others. And also Bluma's point that in this digital world, when we weren't in person interacting with each other, that the goal in our conversation was, I just want to get my point out there. I'm going to type it because nobody can interrupt me, and then I can hit send. What we have gotten away from, and I actually think this started before COVID. I think COVID, unfortunately, accelerated. It's an issue that I see anyway. I don't know if everyone will agree with me. But we've gotten to a point where there are so many divisive issues out there, and COVID, having us not in person, accelerated this. We're no longer seeing that ability to have a discussion, disagree with each other on certain things, but get off of that disagreement point and figure out, but what do we agree on? What are the commonalities that we have, and how can we build off of that? So I know for me, what I've been thinking about a lot at work is, what am I going to do soonish to be able to bring people together at the JCC, virtually, however we're going to do it, a mix of both, but start to force some uncomfortable conversations for people as we come out of this, so that we can start modeling for our kids better, whether it's, how we view things that are going on in the broader world, or even just in the Memphis Jewish community. If it's about an act of racism, about an act of anti-Semitism, everyone's got their definitions, their views. But I think, at least for the Memphis Jewish community, I have to believe that we've all got the common goals of everybody respecting each other. Let's understand each other. And as we're able to start getting some more in-person things, I hope that we can get back to having some of those discussions where at the end of the day, Dan and I may fight about something, which we don't. We're besties. But at the end of the day, even if we disagree on something, we're going to have a cup of coffee or something together. It's because we can still be friends, because there's so much that we have in common. We need to focus more on that. And if the kids see us focusing on our shared goals, it's going to make a world of difference.
Well, I love what you said. When I first became a teacher and I started in the classroom in 91, I love that Rachel Shankman is here. Shameless plug for Facing History and Ourselves, because what I'm hearing as a teacher trained in Facing History at the very start of my career, what I hear is an incredible opportunity to build a shared language. And Bluma brought this up at the very start, how we talk amongst ourselves, how all of us as Jews leverage one another to reach that, which leads me to my last rabbinic moment here, is that I wanted to go to Shavuot to our fate is bound up in one another. Like, with no matter how we all differ religiously in our Jewish observation, the fact is our fate is bound up in each other. And so I want us to finish the last few minutes of our conversation before we open it up for questions or just observations from our friends who are here with us. Our fate is bound up in each other. We learn the extent to which the fate of every single one of us is really in the hands of one another. It goes to Dan's statement about empathy, is that we are bound up. So as we talk about hope, which the new year is about hope, the whole experience as we talk about hope, what gives you hope? What opportunity? And I will shamelessly be unafraid to say it. What are we missing an opportunity for that we should just say and put out there now to get even stronger as a Jewish organizations, all of us, so that we all go into hope with the power. There's 12,000 Jews in Memphis. 7,000 of them, so 12,000 Jews in Memphis. How do we supercharge that group and intertwine our fate with one another? Where are we missing our opportunity? What gives you hope, and what would you lever to make it even better?
So you used some great words there of intertwined and bound together, and I'm really struck by a couple of things. There's a teaching that I always go back to. We're, as you said, we're in the month of Elul. We're getting very close to the beginning of the Jewish holidays. In the Daf Yomi cycle right now, we're learning about Sukkot. And in Sukkot, which is coming up in just about 40 days from now, we gather together the four species. We have the lulav and the etrog and the hadas and the arava. And you have these four different things, and there are so many different commentaries as to what these things can symbolize as parts of the body or different types of Jew or whatever it might be, but you can't fulfill your obligation if you only have one of them, right? You need all four of them, and not only do you need all four of them, they're supposed to be bound together and held together. And when I think about Memphis, we're still new to Memphis. We've been here for 3 years and 2 months, starting my 4th year at the school. And one of the things that we really love about Memphis is that it is a true community, that you have these four different species that are only whole when they come together. And, for me, that's the hope, that we can only strengthen that we can only intertwine or bind those things even tighter together. And I give a lot of credit to the hard work that JCP has done specifically over the last year and a half in bringing the execs together from the different Jewish organizations, because that's allowed us to learn from one another and to form a network with each other. And we're all one community and we all rely on each other. I think of the work that the JCC has done. My wife is sitting across from me right now. And I think of the book club that Marcy Stagner started through the JCC. And I think of these different women who have come together in this book club from all different walks of lives, ages, observances, and different things. And they've really created this chavurah. They've created this group that's bound together, not just through a love of reading, but through their constant texting of each other. I see this as a community, and I look at all of these different opportunities that we have, and my hope is that we're going to strengthen it, that we're going to continue to find these opportunities to bring people together, whether it's through discussion, whether it's through a Zoom call, whatever it might be. No matter how different we are one community.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on that too. I think my hope for the year, my challenge for us moving forward, we have been separated at this point for far too long. No generation should ever have, to go through something like this. So for me, it's as agency leaders, beyond the things that we typically gather for, when there's a memorial that we need to gather for, if there's a Yom HaShoah event that we gather for, I think we need to seek out more of the celebratory opportunities to gather for. If there's a holiday that is less restrictive because of different denominational practices, let's have less of the individuals and let's try and come together a little bit more, as one whole community. That's kind of my challenge going forward, is bringing us together more, again, around the things that we share in common.
Yeah, and I echo everything, and I would just add, in thinking about, Lauren mentioned the shofar, and for me, I find the blowing of the shofar every year to be incredibly powerful, inspiring, and one of the reasons is because we're all standing there together, and we're all engaging in our own self-reflection and our own communal reflection, but we're there together as one Jewish people, hopefully being stirred and motivated to do better. So I hope that when we all hear the shofar this year, that we will continue to be inspired and stirred to do everything that Jeremy and Dan just said, to collaborate, to be empathetic, to be kind, and to continue all the silver linings of the pandemic to bring us into the future and to continue as our wonderful Jewish community.
So panelists, y'all were amazing. So many beautiful things. And to kind of sum us up, this is what I've collected as I've been taking notes. We are bound together, shared and bound together and motivated to do better. We are empowered. We are incredibly kind. We show empathy. We solve problems through empathy. We need to seek more opportunities for celebration. We are creatives with hidden talents. We can speak with one voice, with one shofar to inspire the next generation. So thank you. And Lauren, I know Lauren wanted to come back on, but thank you all so much for coming and for this opportunity.
And thank you to Leigh and to Jeremy and to Bluma and to Dan. I have to say, first of all, that as not only a professional in the Jewish community, but a parent as well, as someone who has worked in more than half of the organizations who are represented right now, and someone who has really come in and been a part of this Jewish community, it is so incredible and heartwarming to hear about all of our triumphs over the past year, over really even before that. And I think that really ties back into the month of Elul and the high holidays, and the fact that as we're looking forward to a new year and whatever that may bring, that we have so much to be proud of. Someone shared in the chat that, you know, it's a small number of Jews. I know there are many different estimates, but it's about 7,000 or 8,000 adults and 12,000 if you include the kids. Bluma, I think that hopefully that's close to the JCP estimates. But they said, well, they're really busy. And if you think about our conversations here and about the greater Jewish community, we do so much and we have so much to be proud of. So again, thank you all as we continue through the month of Elul and into the high holidays. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around the fact that it's mid-August and we're really starting to think about all of that. But all of our amazing organizations and congregations in the JCC have other programs coming up. And I hope that you will all join for some of those. With the JCC, we have a lunchtime learning where you will get a sweet treat from Ricky's and a conversation looking towards the Rosh Hashanah, and that is on August 26th. And then on the Sunday in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which is September 12th, we will be having a reflective yoga practice in partnership with our fitness department. So it really, again, kind of draws on the talents of our entire community. And I want to just thank everyone for joining us. Again, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Bluma. And thank you to Leigh for bringing your incredible insight as an educator and a member of our Jewish community. So everyone have a wonderful evening and have a good, reflective, hopeful month of Elul and high holiday season. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
You night.